Right to my left here is Fitzroy Christian, who is with CASA, Community Action for Safe Apartments, and located in the South Bronx, a little bit to the west of where a lot of the fires were first concentrated, but started to spread at one point, and also where a lot of the organizing work around the rezoning that you saw along Jerome Avenue that just got passed last year was happening, the Bronx Coalition for a Community Vision. So Fitzroy, could you talk a little, just share a little bit about your own reaction to the film, but thinking about yourself as a neighborhood leader in this kind of ongoing struggle, and how folks who come into this newly, whether they're young people or also people who come as immigrants or new arrivals to the Bronx, how they join up and be part of this ongoing legacy and struggle.
That's a loaded question, but let me see how I can unpack that. As an immigrant, when I came to the United States in 1971, I moved right into the fires, into the Southwest Bronx. The first couple of years, I couldn't figure out what it was that was happening. But fortunately, I was at City College in the middle of the Black Studies programs, where all of the professors were very much aware of what was going on. So I got a kind of an understanding at that time that what was going on around me wasn't things that we were doing, but things that were being done to us. And the only way we could make a change is if we were to join in a resilience and a resistance to what other people were doing to us, those who were burning us out, those who were forcing us out. And so 4 years within coming to the United States, I found myself with a loose group of organizers in the Southwest Bronx. But we were trying to get the kids not to take that money to burn their buildings down. We were not quite organized yet where we could take on the landlords and the riches. So we're saying what we can do is to keep our kids, our young people, those who were in the gangs, from taking that $3, that $50, try to stop those who were using drugs from taking a $10 so they could get their next fix to burn the building down. And that was my introduction to resistance and to rebuild the Bronx in the 1970s. The building I'm in now, I moved in 1975. I was the second family to move back into a rebuilt building. And I'm still here because, to me, this is my Bronx. I'm here to stay. I'm going to fight to keep it for my children. I have 3 boys. They got to have a place to live. And my struggle is for them and for their children. And I'm here, I'm going to keep on fighting.
And also with us tonight is Marc Dones. And did I get that right? No, sorry. All right, I'm gonna let him introduce himself too and say it properly. We just met literally right now. So, who does a lot of work around systems change work and thinking about, and I would love for you to share, obviously again, share whatever's there for you, but to think about, there's so many systems involved in what happens in the backstory of the fires, and there's a lot of work that had to go in terms of the organizing to think about how do we transform systems. And maybe if you could share, again, your reaction overall, but also part of that work and how it connects into the work and the struggle that's going on today.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So my name is Marc Dones. I'm an anthropologist. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I'm psyched to be here. One of the things that's with me, just like generally speaking right now, is just gratitude. I'm just really grateful to both of you for what you've done. I feel it's unique, right? That struggle sort of generates that kind of connection where I don't know you at all, and like having watched that, and now I feel like we come from the same cloth, and I'm just really grateful for the work that you've done. So thank you. So my job is a weird one. So I started my career about 10 years ago doing public policy work, in part because I had thought that I wanted to be a physician, and then I actually worked in a methadone to abstinence clinic on the Lower East Side and realized that I didn't want to be a physician. And in part, I will say, right, like that it was the policies that were so broken, right? Like we weren't allowed to help anyone. It was always a question of, was the person insured? If not, who was paying for them to be there? And so the range of options that you were taught in terms of how you could help someone were markedly different from what you were allowed to do to help someone. And I didn't want to do that. And so I wound up in health policy because I got confused and decided that health policy was a way to fix the thing that I was seeing. But I'm also an anthropologist, and my family is originally from Tulsa, where there were another kind of fires. But the root is the same, right? The root of the fires is always the same, which is racism. It is not benign neglect, it is malignant neglect, and it is just malignance. It is white racism and white supremacy that has driven and destroyed these communities over and over and over again. And I have been trying for the last 10 years to translate that sentence into policy. And so I've done a lot of work in violence prevention, in homelessness, in youth development, all within a lens of, can you just ask people what they need and do that? Like, it doesn't need to be more complicated than just like, I don't know, like, what do you need? And I've been fortunate enough to have different positions that have allowed me to execute on that. Some of the first violence prevention work I ever did in Massachusetts worked with young Black and brown men and found that they needed money, and so we just gave them money. It was like if you just do what people need, it turns out you can short circuit decades of bad work. I've done a lot of work nationally around homelessness, have changed some HUD policy around that, and I'm happy to talk about that over the course of the evening if it comes up.
Thank you. Yeah, so one of the, so Ramon Huerta, who's in the film here, who was with one of the co-founders at People's Development Corporation, and he mentions it in the film, if you didn't catch it, he really saw that the people in the neighborhood as a resource. Unemployed people and vacant buildings as resources, as assets to build on. And this was exactly what he said. All we need is the money to help us do this work and the resources. And this was some of the origins of sweat equity. And that lens of looking at the things that people from the outside often deem as problems or things to fix, or here's what, we can't trust these people, right? These kind of ideas, as opposed to what you're saying. Just ask the people, that people in the neighborhoods have a lot of expertise, right, is something critical, and I think was really missing. And Vivian, maybe could you share a little bit about that in terms of just turning that narrative and that lens on its head, and how central that is to you in terms of the vision for this film, of the idea of that people in the neighborhoods are worth trusting?
Well, I think that, I don't know, that's also a big question. So when Ramon said that, he was like, it was just that simple, right? Here are the people, here are the buildings, and we've been struggling on how to take care of each other, and we decided we were just gonna take over the building. And what I sometimes say is wow, that was out of the box thinking, but it really wasn't out of the box thinking. It was natural, right, for him to think that there are people that are willing to support their neighbors, to build, to construct, and to do whatever they could. I say that, and then I think about I don't know, this must be my 40th screening, okay? And I've been traveling around the country with the film, and what I hear people respond to is that, I remember when my grandfather took care of the building. I remember when our neighbors were, African American, Irish, Jewish, Italian, and we all took care of each other. And I remember when we all borrowed sugar and rice, and when we had to take each other to the hospital when someone broke their arm, so-and-so came. So that, the other interesting sort of context to this is that you see it on film, and yes, it was a crazy time, right? The backdrop, the fires, the abandonment, all of that. But I remember that I had a good time growing up, and that I knew that there were people looking out after me, and I remember the gangs. I mean, yes, we had gang members who, they probably did bad things, right? But they also took care of us. And that was an amazing asset. We learned from people who were involved in gangs, and these gangs, you know, based on my own personal history, were there because they didn't have anything else that supported them, that was the structure, you know, right? That's the first thing you learn in youth development. Why do young people join gangs? For a sense of belonging, to feel important, to contribute, all of that. And that's what was going on when I was growing up. And so what was missing was the infrastructure that came from the outside, you know, that we didn't have. And so we were stuck there without much support, doing the best that we could. And we, you know, I don't mean to be Pollyannish about this, because a lot of us didn't make it out, but a lot of us did.
No, totally extraordinary, right? You see that the system wasn't designed for people to do well and thrive, but people, in the face of that, were able to overcome so many barriers and also invent and design and create new structures internally to support each other. And that's a lot of the model of the organizing work that we see. And you know, we also have to think about how this connects to a lot of the struggles today, and who receives investment, who doesn't, and the connections to race and class currently.
Well, let me just say
Yeah,
something, right? Because what we see today is that people still distrust government. People still distrust, right? So, you know, we think about, well, why doesn't that person trust, you know, government? Why doesn't they trust institutions that want to help? But that's because they weren't there, you know. So now it's very difficult to trust.
Go ahead. Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, my response to that is that the governments and the institutions and all the agencies still do not help us. We are the ones who have to find a way to get what we want and to get it done our way. Mm-hmm. Because if left to anybody else, it is not going to be done for us or the way we want. With the rezoning, there are a lot of words that are thrown about a whole lot. Urban renewal, resuscitation of blighted areas, and all the rest of it. Supposedly, the areas are supposed to be cleaned up. But what they're actually doing is cleaning us out for somebody else to come in and take over, right? And this is what we are fighting against, actually. It's cultural genocide. That's what we are fighting, right? They pushed us out of Williamsburg and Greenpoint. They pushed us out of Harlem. As a matter of fact, this school here, this institution, is a part of what moved us from our homes so that they could have what they have today. Of course, it has a function. There are a lot of people who are coming through here, but that does not justify the amount of homelessness, the cultural institutions that were lost, and so many families that perished for this to happen. And this is what we are fighting. As I said earlier, we figured that this is our Bronx. When the fires were lit, it was lit so that those who had built their homes, those buildings years ago, could make a profit. The fact that a lot of us were burned out, a lot of us died in the fires, a lot of our families lost thousands and thousands of dollars that was saved. We came here to make a better life for ourselves, and all of those went up in flames. When we needed the help of the fire stations, they closed them. When we got sick, they closed our hospitals. When we wanted better schools, they closed the schools and they take public money to support private schools. Everything that we wanted for our survival and for our existence was taken away and given to others, and that is why we are fighting. Telling us that you're going to be rezoning Jerome Avenue, what they did was to select the area where our middle class, those people who are in the auto industry, who had built 30, 40 years of an economic structure on which the rest of the Southwest Bronx was built. Because the ecosystem around that included clinics, bodegas, restaurants, nightclubs, social clubs, a whole lot of places where we could express our own cultural interests and we could develop our cultural institutions, our social institutions. They took that away. They're closing all of the auto-related stores, which means the restaurants that fed the workers and which fed the people who came in to eat while they were waiting for the vehicles to be fixed are gone. It means that the community can no longer support our pharmacies, which were our sons and daughters who came back from medical school, their businesses, our sons and daughters who opened their insurance offices in their own neighborhoods to provide services to us are gone. Why? Because this month you're paying $5,000 a month for your rent. Your landlord tells you we can no longer support that next month because they're no longer being given 10, 15-year leases. It's a month to month until they tell you to go. This month you're paying $5,000, $8,000 depending on the business you have for rent. The next month you're told you got to pay $35,000 a month. You are not making that amount of profit per year, but they're asking you to pay that in a month. Because why? You close up, and they could sell that property to speculators and make a whole lot of money. So your family can no longer support itself. Those of us who are working 16, 18, 20 hours per day, 5, 6, 7 days a week, so our children could go to colleges to be better than we are. We can no longer afford to send our kids to college because our businesses are closed, they have been taken away from us. And that is why we are fighting. Okay?
I think it's really important. So there's a narrative in this country, right, that pervades a lot of things, that like our systems have gaps or failures, and systems, like, so I'm like, I design systems. It's like the thing that I do. And systems actually don't have flaws. They perform as designed. That's really essential, right? Because I think that like the uniformity, right? So, quick systems lesson, nature does actually hate things that look the same. It will not make things that look the same on its own. Humans really need stuff to be routine in order to thrive. That's us, not nature, right? So anytime you see something that is always the same, that is evidence of system-level performance, not human-level decision-making, right? Or individual actor decision-making, I should say. So the fact, right, that like these narratives around fires, around the ways in which Black and brown communities were first neglected and then divested from, et cetera, right? All of that is system-level performance, which is why it looks the same nationally. And I really want to be clear when I say this, that like that design is explicit, right? And I really appreciated how much history you brought into the film in terms of like just actual quotes from people being like, no, I don't like these Black people. So like,
Right,
and like,
because what I say, it's that these decisions were made by humans. It
Right.
wasn't just systems, like you're talking, yeah.
well, and I think that like the idea, right, that like there is the sort of deep history dive you have to do in order to find stuff that was actually just federal policy for hundreds of years, I think it's striking to me how very little folks interact with that history in their day-to-day, even though it structures everything that we see, do, think of as natural. And so like and by proxy, right, like the thriving of white communities is also by design. Like that is not because those communities are inherently better, it is not because the people in them are smarter, it is because they got stuff, boatloads and boatloads of stuff, like resources, right, material resources, for hundreds of years at the expense of other people. And that has to be explicit because it frames then what the systems level response has to be if we actually intend to fix stuff, which is the people who we haven't given things to need access to those same resources structured in the way that they want to use them, right? Which was always available to white communities.
Thank you. So I just read something about how the housing subsidies is more prevalent in white communities. White communities receive more housing assistance and subsidies than poor people of color. And I was flawed by that because I always thought that it was the reverse.
I mean, the most common set of subsidies in housing, right, are how mortgages get financed just through the taxing system, right, which is a subsidy. It is not like the taxes you pay on a home that you own are subsidized deeply by the federal government and have been since the 1930s, right? Like when the Federal Housing Administration comes into being in 1934, it actually is trying to address a different housing crisis. So in 1934, it was the interwar period. We had a lot of homeless white male vets in particular, right? And we didn't have the banking system that we currently have. And so as a result, right, like if I am white male vet 1 and I go to a local bank and I'm not a good bet, right? Like I have no income, I have no plan to get income, right? Like, and so the Federal Housing Administration actually comes into being and links together all of those mortgages and underwrites them and says, if vet John comes to you and says, I want a mortgage, we will take onus for that default should it take place, right? Which is just socialism, just heads up. Like that's, like just when we talk about economic systems that are structured that way, that is socialist, which is a thing that this country also loves to do for white dudes, but not for anybody else. But the point is, right, that like the redlining comes into being after the creation of the Federal Housing Administration because, right, in that same moment that they said, like, we want to deeply subsidize white people who want homes, they made a corresponding decision, which is, but none of these other people. And so to this day, the amount of money drawn down out of the federal budget for housing subsidy, right, through the mortgage system alone is massive and specifically is targeted towards white folks. And that's before you even get into actual voucher utilization. And it turns out that the vast majority of people in this nation who are experiencing deep poverty are white people, to the tune of like 60%. And it is actually a deliberate and falsified narrative that we see only black and brown faces attached to the utilization of those services so that we can vilify them, so that we can continue to parade out this idea that like people who look like us are drains on society instead of actually engines for it.
Yeah. And I think, let me just add something here, which is, part of that policy also was to systematically do the divide and conquer. When we think about what systems are designed to do, they were very intentionally designed to divide working class white folks who at the time were not even considered fully white. Yes. So working class Jews, Italian, Southern and Eastern Europeans who did qualify for these mortgages, but not if they stayed in their old neighborhoods. So in the South Bronx, if you stayed there and you are white, you would not qualify for a mortgage because that neighborhood was deemed risky because it had been infiltrated by Negroes and Puerto Ricans, as you saw in the documents. So if you were one of those working class whites who was a high risk at the time, in order to qualify for all those benefits, you had to live in an exclusively all white neighborhood. And in that process really gain your whiteness. And this sets up kind of the stage for the 20th century version of the proliferation of the racial wealth gap, on which now when we see these battles playing out over property and who has access to own property, to control property, to build on property, it's built on top of a huge racial wealth gap. So who has the ability to own and control in the current status quo capitalist system? And so why we see a lot of the work and the organizing now is to say, how do we do community ownership where we take that land outside of the current capitalist system because it is built on that racist foundation, is kind of the new anti-capitalist collective work. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there as my own 2 cents into the panel. I I want to give us a few, because we don't have a lot of time, so we could take a few questions.
So, hi, my name is Thomas Lopez Pierre, and I manage a boutique private equity fund, social impact fund. We raise capital exclusively from Black and Hispanic people and deploy it exclusively with Black and Hispanic real estate developers. My question is for the two gentlemen on the end. But first I want to say, your film just changed the name to Bushwick, Brooklyn, and it's the same story. I used to jump out of abandoned buildings, play on mattresses, have to dodge the gangs, the whole thing, went to CUNY. Anyway, so my question for you is, I believe that the next fire that's coming to New York City is an economic fire, and this school is actually a great example of it. We see that the dropout rate among Black and Hispanic is probably about 30 to 40% year over year. That's why 90% of Rikers is Black and Hispanic. But we see our economy moving from an industrial man-labor one to one based on education. In the old day, the Black middle class family would be a conductor, a subway token clerk, but now we use a Metro card, so those jobs are not there. Whereas the same people that are dropping out of high school, and we're not expanding our jail system, where do these people go? Do we see the new fires that Black and Hispanic people will have to leave New York City because the jobs here will not be able to support their existence? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, folks have been leaving in droves from most what we'd classify as, by demography and density, urban areas, right? As those urban areas are, so the practice that you referred to, which was called blockbusting, right, was the systematic progenitor of what we consider to be white flight. It created the suburbs, right? The suburbs were only viable until white people realized they also liked bodegas and they wanted to come back to the city. It's all fun and games until you gotta drive to get milk at 3 a.m. So the renewed interest in the urban environment was about proximity and yada yada yada. And so with that renewed interest came a renewal of urban renewal, which, as James Baldwin famously called, Negro removal, right? And it resuscitated. It was like watching Frankenstein come back to life, right? It was like just the same horrible monster. There had been no real changes. It just does the same thing that it did before. But all of that is to say is that a couple things that I should address. One is that education as a pathway out for Black and brown folks does not statistically bear out. And when I say that, what I mean, right, is that for every Black and brown person who goes on to get a degree, they still do not see, right, the resultant climb in wages that their white counterparts see, right? It's not the engine of economic mobility that we sell it as, right? In fact, the most degreed higher ed and beyond, right, population in this country is who? Black women. Who makes the least money? Black women. Hey. So, it's just it's not that it's a scam, but it's not not a scam. And so, and I don't, I'm out of school, but I do want to be really clear, right, that when we look at the corresponding factors around that, it becomes very clear, right? So Black women get 2 master's degrees, come out with the debt associated with those master's degrees, have long-term depression on their credit, right, on their viability in various markets. Their job choices are limited because they have to pay off a bunch of stuff, right? So all of this activity. Right, they're not getting married. All of so you've got marriage, whatever, but it does mean that income in terms of what you can pool is not the same. But all of that means, right, that what is structured and lauded as economic mobility as a pro-social activity actually bends the arc of economic mobility for particularly, again, Black and brown communities downward in a lot of cases in our current educational system that is so replete with debt as its primary MO. So, if I'm to say, right, what is the coming fire, I would agree, it's already on fire, right? It's already real bad. And I would say that, again, the only way, echoing what you just said, the only way out of it is to consider non-capitalistic approaches to education writ large, which would require us to rethink what the purpose of education is, right? Which we haven't really done since industrialization, blah, 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 blah. So all that is to say is that, school should be free. We should pool our money and buy people's debt. And also, don't pay your loans.
I just met Mark, but I really like him. Okay. Yeah, and there's if you want to read more about that, there's a few reports. The one that's coming to my memory in terms of the name, there's a report called Umbrellas Don't Make It Rain, and it's about the connection between wealth and other life outcomes and how we use education and jobs and these other programs to think that we'll close the economic divide when it actually is the opposite way, right? So ownership and wealth, and we can think of wealth really broadly. We don't have to think about it in just traditional capitalistic ways, but wealth and ownership and how those, and you see that in the sweat equity models, how that transforms and changes people's lives when you have control and ownership over your neighborhood and the land and the buildings you live in, how that will, in the end, change everything about other future life outcomes.
Hi, first I'd like to say that it's really nice to see a film panel and discussion of people that look like me. My father was born in Lincoln Hospital in 1954 and grew up on Tiffany Street, so I grew up with this narrative. What I want to say
I was
is,
born in the old Lincoln too, that's right, yeah.
so I saw that you touched on Mott Haven and how it's been rezoned to the Piano District. And when the party was done for the reopening of this new Piano District, the theme was the Bronx is burning. So how do you keep the hope alive when you're surrounded by all these bigwigs with power and money that look at you as an anecdote?
So, how do I keep hope alive? With all due respect, they tried to rezone it as the Piano District, but we have not allowed it. Folks have said, this is the South Bronx, Piano District, we're not naming it that. So it hasn't been rechanged. No one's calling it that because there was a big effort to resist that. In fact, there was that party that was very offensive to people in the Bronx because they, as a backdrop, had a lot of decorations of like burnt out cans and cars. And then soon after that, there was a party to bring art to the Bronx. And what happened was that a group of artists, through the work of Tat's crew on Alexander Avenue and 138th Street, there's a small art gallery there, and what they did was that they called on all artists to come and bring their art to show that there is art in the Bronx. So several blocks away, there was this party happening where they invited people, celebrities in busloads to come in, and then hundreds, several blocks away from there, hundreds of Bronx artists came on canvas with their sculptures and their paintings and their jewelry and had a massive block party one August night to show that we have art. And so there is resistance. That's why I have hope, because people are fighting. People are resisting. This man right here is resisting every day. He leads an organization called CASA, and there are people that are paying attention to the gentrifiers, the landlords who are buying up property. They're paying attention to those people who are being harassed by landlords. They're protecting those folks. They were responsible for the rights of counsel, which means that any New Yorker now who earns less than $50,000 a year has the right to legal counsel if evicted, because there were so many evictions that were illegal if they face eviction. Okay, so there's a lot of work that's happening in the Bronx and citywide to fight housing injustice. That's why I have the hope.
I would also like to add to your question that we need people like you, young people, to embrace the idea of community ownership of the land and the space in which we live, right? Because of the redlining and the 4 centuries of slavery and denials and everything that we went through as a people, we do not have the individual capital to really do very much by ourselves, right? But if we were to come together as communities where we negotiate with the city or with the state for community-owned property, they have a lot of land that they're giving away, what we call corporate welfareism, that they are getting subsidized and they're getting all the money to make a profit. And we are being denied any kind of money to make a survival, to make a living. If we were to come together and we can begin to own the homes in our community, on the land that we will have maybe for 99 years and then goes all over again. We can begin to set deep roots in our community. We no longer be nomadic because we see people leave the communities from Brooklyn to Harlem, from Harlem to the Bronx, from the Bronx to South Carolina. Who remember when Bloomberg was giving people a whole lot of money for a one-way ticket south? Right? It is all a part of the scheme that they have to whiten New York City to the extent where it is no longer the vibrant, diverse community that it is, but a place for rich white people only, right? And so everything that we are doing, everything that Vivian is doing, CASA, Northwest Bronx, Banana Kelly, is to preserve this place for us, those of us who use sweat equity, as the film said, to hold on to our homes, right? We have been here for 40 years, 50 years, 60 years. We built the Bronx when the city began to disinvest. We were the ones who had water brigades to out the fires that the landlords set. We preserved it. We deserve to stay here, but if we don't come together, intergenerational, to fight for it, we're going to lose it. 10 years from now, even this gathering will look different because there's nobody from this neighborhood around us who'll be here to go to Barnard or go to Columbia University. And that is what we have to fight against.
Yeah.
My question is for Vivian. First, thank you so much for the work that you've done and for making this. The legacy of this has been felt in Puerto Rico to this day. I'm from Puerto Rico, I grew up there, and the legacy of the fires, like what you said in the movie about people here blaming themselves because they didn't know who was doing it. That narrative is still being played out in Puerto Rico. When I first moved here 4 years ago, my family didn't want to, they couldn't understand that the Bronx is not the Bronx, that Harlem is not Harlem, that Brooklyn is not Brooklyn. It's beyond that because a lot of my family was here in the 70s and in the 80s, and it was, that same narrative was used also to further colorism in Puerto Rico and to say, so it was amazing to see Black and Puerto Rican people working here because that is not the narrative that I grew up hearing. It was, don't go there, they are burning our buildings. So that is the narrative that I grew up with, and it's amazing to see this. And just to quickly preface this question, a couple of years ago I was working at a high-end cruise ship line in the Hudson River, and they do lots of corporate events. And I worked one event that was for a realtor, a real estate company that I don't know the name because I was not told at the time, and I didn't think any of it. And I listened in on the conversation. It was some sort of annual gathering that they had, and what was being said was, what are the strategies for displacing communities, essentially, in realtor terms? And one of the communities discussed was the South Bronx, and the strategy that they were proposing was vamping up properties in East New York, whatever that means, and moving them so that there was affordable housing there, so that they could start the high-end real estate in the Bronx. I now live in gentrified Bushwick, or in realtor terms, East Williamsburg, and I see this, I listen to the stories, I go to the places and the stores and the restaurants from Puerto Ricans that have been there for a long time, and they've seen it happen. And now, yes, of course, the government is accountable in the city, but what would it take on the national stage for us to know and to hold accountable who are the people in the private sector that are influencing these government decisions? I mean, obviously there is special interests that influence the laws, and we still don't know about it. Like, yes, New York is gentrified, but we don't talk about who are the people, and we have every resource to do it. So what do you think would take for them to be held accountable on the national stage?
Okay, so you're asking me a very complicated question, and I'm just going to throw out my personal perspective here. I don't think it's going to be national. I mean, I think that what I'm hoping this film will do and what the work of others are doing, like these guys here with me, is that we have to elevate the national conversation, but the change has to come from the grassroots. We have to come in from the bottom and put pressure all the way up, because from a national perspective, I don't see, I see very few people sort of talking about it. Even when you look at the Democratic debates, I don't know how many people are, still in the running, but really folks are not discussing, and there are no questions about the housing crisis in this country, and we are having a housing crisis. We definitely are, but that needs to come from the bottom. The thing that I do want to share with you, because you kind of, you brought it up in certain ways, is that when Banana Kelly decided that they were going to take over their block and build, when the People's Development Corporation decided they were going to take over the block, when my neighbors in my building decided that we were going to buy our own boiler, fix the heating system, get our own electricity, and do whatever we had to do because our landlord actually passed away and our building was left, right, was that we experienced a kind of collaboration that we sort of need to get back to, and I see young people doing it now. But back then, people often ask me about the collaboration between African Americans and Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, and even the Irish people that were left behind and the Jews that were left behind. We had this kind of social fabric that, because we were in it together, we worked together and we fought together and we cared for each other. And I think that in thinking about and talking about how we're going to make changes, we really need to make sure that each of us, we knock on our neighbor's door and we ask them how they're doing. We get to know our neighbors, we get to share, and I think that's where it starts. Then we get onto the work of organizing. But, in doing this work, and, I'll have to share the example with CASA. I mean, people who come together care for each other. And it's across all kinds of racial and ethnic lines. That's where we have to begin the work to bubble it up to the national level, because I don't know whether it's going to start here. It has to come from the bottom and kind of, Oh, and the other thing, that's Ricky, my husband, who always reminds me about what I should say. It's okay. We are touring in Puerto Rico the last 2 weeks of February, the film, because what we're told is that the folks in Puerto Rico really didn't understand what was going on in the South Bronx. And so we want to share that history with our brothers and sisters on the island.
Give me 1 second.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Very briefly, in particular to your question, but I guess it goes to everybody as well. We should stop thinking about who we are going to hold accountable for what is happening if we are not prepared to do something for ourselves. Okay? So, yes, we would like if somehow funds were made available, resources were made available, but we have to find a way, no matter how creative it comes, to begin to get those resources and start to do for ourselves. We have to start holding ourselves accountable for not doing anything to alleviate the problems that we are having, right? So instead of thinking about what Washington is going to do or can do, or what Albany is going to do or can do, or what City Hall is going to do, we know we can't trust any of them, period. The only people we can trust is us. And we have to come together, do what they did on Kelly Street and on Fox Street and in Simpson Street. And they who used their own sweat equity, damaged fingers, some of them have bad backs today because of the weight. They didn't have the tools to lift the heavy stuff they were moving around, and they got hurt. But they were building their home, they were building their future. And they were not waiting for governments to come and help them. They found a way collaboratively to come as a community and do what a community needs to do to survive. And that is what we have to start doing again. What can we do? How can we form that community that we need for our community to survive, for us to survive, so that our children can have a place of their own after we have left.
Though that does not mean that you do not hold your government accountable. And one of the other lessons that's touched on a little bit in this film, folks in Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition were part of a national alliance called National People's Action that actually fought to expose the banks for the redlining practices, because there was this, like the historic maps, the redlining policies, those were not known at the time. And people experienced redlining in a lot of ways, but the things that they had to fight for were actually things like the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, which are federal policy that requires banks to disclose if they're making loans in neighborhoods or not, and some different laws and tools like the Community Reinvestment Act that are not the be-all, end-all. We know those are not the solution in and of themselves, but they are pieces of federal legislation that can help and support, and a lot of the rebuilding in the Bronx is because of that type of organizing and that type of laws, and why the fire stopped eventually. So that's the other piece that does have to be a part of it, to build on top of the community ownership and the pieces of folks growing things up from the bottom up. So there's all kinds of, it's not like it's just one thing that's gonna do this. There's, like as Vivian says in the film, right, it came from so many different sides. We have to fight back from all different angles as well. And there's part of a bigger, larger collective struggle of people bringing that all together that really has to be part of it. So there's plenty to say about that, and we gotta hold these guys to account too, right? You know, we gotta. Do you wanna say any closing words, Mark? Because we gotta wrap up.
I'm telling Mark what to say.
I'll say it. What do you want me to say? Oh yeah, no, I'll say that. People need to learn policy. That's true. Like, I teach a grad school course on systems design because it's just like it is thought of as arcane when it literally structures everything around you, and like everything you interact with is a set of decisions that were made at a policy level. Where the door handle is on that door is a policy decision. It's not arbitrary, right? So nothing around us actually built structures, the lives we lead are all intricately pre-structured before we even arrive in them. And most of our choices aren't real choices at this point. And learning policy and engaging and figuring out how to engage, I think, through an organizing lens is actually really crucial. Building on that accountability thing, the only thing that I would really close with is that, one of the quotes I think about a lot is from Vincent Harding, who was an advisor and speechwriter for Dr. King, and he asked one time, is America possible? Is this country, right, where like we think of diversity actually as a strength? Is that a real thing that we could get to? And I think that the fundamental question of whether or not this country is possible is rooted in whether or not we actually think of everyone who is in this country as people, right? And so it is essential that you become civic-minded, that you engage with the tools of government, that you figure out how to make and remake those tools, because if you don't do that, there is no impetus for them to cease being predatory on their own. It just won't happen.
So I just want to also honor the legacy of all the folks who fought over the years and to hold up their spirits, and especially for Miss Dr. Hetty Fox, who passed away very recently. Was it like maybe only a month or two ago? So just really honoring their struggle, and as Vivian says, like that all the work that we do is on their backs, and we owe it as younger folks in the struggle to learn about the work that they did and build on top of the work that they've done. Vivian, do you want to close this out with any words?
I just want to say thank you. I want to dedicate this to the people of the South Bronx for their survival. I want to dedicate it to you guys who have parents and uncles and aunts and grandparents who grew up at that time and during that time and struggled, really struggled. So this is for you and for them. I want to dedicate this panel to Hetty. Thank you so much, because she was a force. Just to say something about her, hers was one of the only blocks in the entire South Bronx that did not burn. She would not let her block, both sides of the street, burn. That was amazing. She was an amazing and a force to reckon with. So I know she's, here with us. And that's it. Thank you so much. Oh, and we have a high school curriculum that we're working on. It'll be out very shortly. So if you're interested, follow us on educatorfire.com. We're going to be posting announcements about the curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you.